So we are recording and we're looking at problem 1 of assignment 10. And we are given that the exchange rate between the Australian dollar and the Indian rupee is determined in a flexible foreign exchange market, which means a market forces, supply and demand, are going to determine where the values of these currencies are. So we're going to assume that India is currently in recession. And we need to know what physical policy action could the Indian government take to eliminate the recession. Now, remember, fiscal policy is tax and or spend, right? So if an economy is in a recession, obviously you want to get more money flowing through the economy. So the government can either spend more to get more money in the economy, or the government can tax less, which would also put more money into the economy. So either one of those answers would be correct. What would be the effect of the fiscal policy action identified in Part A on interest rates in India? Okay, now what I've done is I have drawn the graphs that are applicable to all of the questions. And I'm going to move you guys somewhere out of the way if I can. There we go. However, I think it's been, I actually prepared this probably a month ago. So I'm kind of like reminding myself what I did. But I'm fairly sure that I highlighted in green the ones you're actually going to have to draw per the assignment, right? The ones the assignment is asking you to draw. However, I've drawn all of them to help you understand how better to answer the questions, which sort of reinforces this idea that if you know the graphs, you can pretty much answer 90% of the questions that you're going to get, either in the free response or in the multiple choice. So if the Indian government wants to fight a recession, they're going to either increase spending or decrease taxes. And this is, of course, you should know, and I'm sure you do know, is expansionary fiscal policy. And this would increase the demand for money. Because if the government spends more, then the government is going to demand money. And if there's taxes, there's going to be less taxation, then it means that there's going to be more money being demanded by consumers. So that's going to push the money demand curve to the right, which is going to mean nominal interest rates. So when we're looking at the money market, the horizontal axis, or the vertical axis. The vertical axis is the nominal interest rate, which does not take inflation into account, right? The real interest rate is the nominal minus inflation. So when we're looking at the nominal, we're just looking at what the interest rate is, not taking into account whatever the inflation rate is. So anyway, the nominal interest rate is going to go up, right? Because money demand is going to shift to the right. And the question we were asked, let me get you guys somewhere out there, let me just back up, so they're asking what would happen, what would be the effect of a fiscal policy on interest rates in India. And the answer is going to be obviously that they're going to go up, right? Because you're going to have more money in the economy. You could get more investment, more spending. Okay, so interest rates are going to go up. Now, the next question is, what would be the effect of this fiscal policy, which we know is expansionary, this policy action identified in Part A? Okay, I've already said that, right? Yeah, it's going to go up. Okay, C. we want to draw a correctly labeled graph of the foreign exchange market. Now this is the one you actually have to draw, okay? For the Australian dollar, showing your graph the impact of the change in the interest rates identified in part B on the supply of Australian dollars and the equilibrium exchange rate of the Australian dollar. Now, the tricky thing about this is whenever you draw a graph of the foreign exchange market, you're going to be using two currencies. And so if it's for the Australian dollar, then you would put that, the quantity, is for the Australian dollar. So that's going to be in your horizontal axis is going to be quantity of whatever the currency is they're asking you to draw it for, which is in this case, the Australian dollar. Now, if that's what you have for your horizontal axis, a variable, then in your vertical axis, you're going to have the other exchange rate or currency, I should say, I'm sorry, the other currency, which is the Indian rupee, in the numerator over the currency that's the quantity that you're looking at in the horizontal axis. So this is going to be the Indian. So the exchange rate is going to be the rupees per dollars, right? Rupees per dollars, right? So what does it, how many rupees does it cost to buy $1 is what we're kind of like asking, right? So we know that if we have higher interest rates in India, we know from our study that that's going to attract foreign investment because higher interest rates means higher return on investment when they're buying like government bonds, things like that, or investing, making capital investments, private investments in India. Foreigners will come in with their capital if the interest rates are higher because they can get more for their investment. They're actually lending money, and they're more likely to lend more money into India if the interest rates are higher. So that's going to increase capital inflow into India, okay? So if we're assuming that capital is flowing into India, and since we're talking about, Australia and India, let's go back really quickly. Let's jump back to our question so we know what we're doing here. Okay. Right. So we're talking about, so when we think about, capital inflow, it's obviously coming in from the world, but we're really focusing here on two countries. So we're thinking about capital inflow from Australia into India. Okay. So we're thinking about that in this particular case. So if there's going to be capital flowing into, if Australians are using their dollars to invest into India, they're going to have to exchange their Australian dollars for Indian rupees. So the supply of Australian dollars on the foreign exchange is going to shift to the right. It's going to increase because of the capital inflow from Australia into India. And in order for it to get into India, it's got to go on the foreign exchange first, right? That's where it has to go first. And then from there, the dollars are exchanged for rupees, and from there it flows into India. Okay, so the supply of dollars on that exchange is going to go up, which, if you draw the graph correctly, tells you that the value of the Australian dollar relative to the Indian rupee is going to go down, okay? Because as more and more dollars are supplied, right, it drives the price. So it means that less rupees will buy the same dollar, right? So whatever the exchange is, who knows? So let's just say, for a sake of argument, that before this happens, that 20 rubles buys $1. When you see a shift like this, and the value of the Australian dollar goes down, then we just say, instead of 20 rubles per dollar, it might be only 15 rubles or 18 rubles per dollar, right? That's what that value is. So this value right here, since the numerator gets smaller, then the value goes down, right? It's just sort of the mathy part of it, right? So where was I? Where were I? This means okay. So the Australian dollar is going to devalue or depreciate relative to the Indian rupee. So a depreciated Australian dollar means Australian exports to the world are now less expensive. So there's also a capital outflow. So if there's a capital inflow from Australia to India, then we can assume there's a capital outflow from Australia to the world. This means that when you have an increase in capital outflow, you must have an increase in net exports or exports. So if there's an increase in Australian exports, mainly because their exports to the world now are less expensive because their dollars are cheaper, right? So if Australian exports increase, all else being equal, it means that their net exports are going to go up, which means that the aggregate demand, because net exports is a component of the aggregate demand function, as you know. So that means that aggregate demand in Australia is going to increase, which means that the unemployment in Australia will decrease as aggregate demand shifts out and we go up to a higher output, a higher real GDP. So I've drawn the graphs right here that explain, the problem's not asking you to, I'm trying to get you guys out of the way. Well, okay. But what they're asking, as you know, is they're asking you how the change in the exchange rate would affect Australian exports, and then how that would affect unemployment. So I've kind of really tried to help you see the cause and effect here, how you get from a devalued currency to lower unemployment right here. And I've just drawn these graphs in here to show you what this looks like graphically, because it's just helpful, I think. So when you have an increase, and I don't know if I have the function here or not, but you've seen it over and over again. Probably if I just let me just look here really quickly. That's okay. The function for the function for aggregate demand is government spending plus consumption, or consumption plus government spending plus investment plus net exports, right? So net exports are part of aggregate demand. So when they go up, it means that aggregate demand goes up, shifts out, which means that output, we go from YE here to Y2, which means that we get closer to full employment, because remember, a potential GDP, or where the long run aggregate supply curve is, that's where we are at full employment. So as we get closer to full employment, that means, and also see price levels, when this shifts out, price levels go up, which means if we look at the Phillips curve over here, what's happening here causes the inflation rate to go up because price levels are going up. So inflation is going to go up. And as we move closer to full employment here, we're moving from point A to B here, less unemployment. Okay, so so we have a shift here to the right and a movement here up and to the left. Okay, If you don't fully understand what I just did right there, please say something. If you don't say anything, I assume you got it. You got it. So you got it? Okay. Does anybody need me to go over any part of that again? Okay. We're good. Okay. Okay. So I believe that, yeah, that ends problem one. Okay. So problem one, we're done. All right. Problem two. Take a breath, because this is another long one. Whew. Okay. So assume that the U.S. economy is currently in short-run equilibrium with an actual unemployment rate above the natural rate of unemployment. So we want to draw a correctly labeled graph with both the long-run Phillips curve and the short-run Phillips curve. Label the current short-run equilibrium point P. Okay. Okay, so what does that look like? So once again, I've drawn what you have to draw, and I've drawn the other one just to show you, right? They're not asking you to draw this. They're asking you to draw this, right? Now, why don't I have, hold on one second. I don't have my bouncing ball here, so I'm going to make one because I need it. I think it's helpful. 1 second. Blue. Okay. All right. So now, so we're what we're seeing here. I don't know why I drew that though. Well, let me think here for a second. What problem two? This should be actually be okay. Let me go through this whole problem because I don't because I see something else is going to happen here. This is shifted over. Okay, what is just when you're actually above it means this is over here. Okay, so I'm not sure. It's been a while, so let me see why I did it that way. It's probably something else that's going to happen. But anyway, what you have to draw, what you want to draw is this, right? You want to draw a point P right here where you're that's right. What am I thinking? I'm not thinking right. Let me jump back over here. Read this again. Oh, the unemployment rate. Okay, the unemployment rate. So you got to be careful. I read that as employment rate. I didn't see the un just now. But when I actually did it, I did it correctly. So if the unemployment rate is above the natural rate, that means we're in a recession, right? Which means we want to draw, you don't have to, but I just did it just to show you, which means we're somewhere here below full employment, because this graph shows full employment. This graph over here, which is why it's confusing, shows unemployment, right? So point P right here shows unemployment on the short run Phillips curve above where full employment is right here on the long run. So that would look like this. So the graph, like if you were actually doing this on a real exam, the only thing you would have to draw would be very simply this curve right here, this curve right here, and this curve right here, and then point P. And then you don't even have to do I1. I put that in there. You just got to just show where, show that U1 or whatever, they don't even have this label, right? But whatever you want to label this, you something, just you, right, is going to, the important thing is that you draw the point P here and not here, right? If the point was here, you would be below the long run. See, the long run Phillips curve right here is actually showing the same point for employment as this curve is right here, right? This is full employment. So if we go past here on this curve, we're more unemployment, because this means going from left to right, we're getting more and more unemployed, right? More and more folks are unemployed. Going from left to right on this graph, we're getting a higher employment. So it's backwards. It's like the opposite. So be careful, okay? Anyway, so that's that one, right? So what are they actually asking you? So you want to draw the graph here, okay? And then we want to answer some things about it. So let's go back and see what they're asking us. So assuming no policy actions are taken, will the short-run Phillips curve shift to the right or shift to the left or remain the same in the long run? Explain. Well, in the long run, what's going to happen is you're going to get back to the long-run Phillips curve. So in the long run, and you don't have to draw it. It's not asking you to, but I drew it. In the long run, it's going to shift back to the left, to where we're back at full employment right here. So the way you would explain that is that high unemployment, which is what we have right here, causes inflation expectations to go down. In other words, people expect, if people can't buy things because they're not employed, that's going to shift demand to the left, which means prices are going to end up going down, not up. So the short run Phillips curve is going to shift to the left because we expect prices to go down because we expect the aggregate demand curve to shift to the left, right? Does that make sense? I hope so. If you don't understand what I'm saying, please say, stop, Mr. Charlton. Say, ooh, what are you talking about? Okay. Anyway, so when factor input costs like wages decline, not to decline, just decline. Okay, sorry about that. Decline, aggregate supply shifts right. So what will happen is when there's more unemployment, so when there's more unemployment, wages will start to drop in order to get people back to work, in order to draw people back in, right? Wages start to drop. So that means the short run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right. Increases in aggregate supply cause a leftward shift in the Phillips curve, okay? So when aggregate supply shifts to the right, you're going to get a higher employment, and that's going to mean the Phillips curve shifts to the left, okay? Because if you think about it, when the short run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right, prices go down, employment goes up, which is what happens when the short run Phillips curve shifts to the left. Prices go down, right? We come back to here somewhere, and employment goes up because unemployment goes down. Okay. Okay. So now let's see. What's the next question? If the Federal Reserve Bank wants to lower unemployment, make sure. Okay, good. Sorry about that. I just wanted to check something. Okay, going back. Okay. If the Federal Reserve Bank wants to lower unemployment, what expansionary open market operation should they use? Well, they want to put money into the money supply, so they want to buy bonds, right? And how will the open market operation you identified in Part C affect the following: the federal funds rate and the real interest rate in the short run? Okay, so let's jump back over to our thing. So the Federal Reserve should buy bonds to increase the money supply, and that will decrease nominal interest rates. Because if the money supply goes up, if we jump back over here, if money supply goes up, right, like that, it means interest rates are going to go down, right? I didn't draw that a graph, but you can easily see that. So they're going to decrease the federal funds rate now because reserves increase because there's more money because they're selling, the banks are selling their bonds to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is buying the bonds, giving the money to the banks. The banks' reserves increase, so the supply of loanable funds. I have it here. Okay, I've got the graph right here. Okay, and so anyway, where was I? So the supply of loanable funds will increase because banks have more in their reserves, causing the real interest rate, which takes into account inflation, is going to go down in the short run. Remember, the real interest rate will increase if inflation decreases, right? So this is what that would look like. The supply of loanable funds would go up. There would be more money supplied to be loaned out, and that's going to drive the real interest rates down, okay? And once again, this graph right here, when you're talking about loanable funds, you're taking into account with the real interest rate, whatever the expected inflation rate is. So this is the difference between the real interest rate and the nominal. The nominal does not take into account the expected inflation. Okay, so that takes care of that question. And let's jump back and see what's next here. Given your answer in part D2, what is the effect on real gross domestic product in the short run? Explain. Okay, so if the real interest rate decreases, interest-sensitive investment and spending will increase. Now, this is where I don't want you to get confused. When you're talking about foreign investment, foreign investors come in and buy things like government bonds. They want a high interest rate because they're actually lending money when they come in. And they are going to, so you're going to get more foreign inflow of capital when the interest rates are higher. When the interest rates are lower, then you're going to get more domestic investment because firms and consumers tend to borrow the money they use to invest. Typically, if a person buys a house, they don't pay cash. They actually borrow the money and they have a mortgage. So when the interest rates are lower, you're going to have more investment spending. People tend to use their credit cards more as well, okay? So that's going to increase. So that's going to shift the aggregate demand curve to the right, which means that the real GDP in the short run is going to increase, period, right? Okay. So that takes care of that one. And let me jump the other way. The next question is, Japan and the U.S. are major trading partners. Indicate how the change in real GDP you identified in parts E will affect the demand for Japanese yen in the foreign exchange market. And then they want you to draw a correctly labeled graph of the foreign exchange market for the Japanese yen, which means the yen is going to be the quantity in the horizontal axis, showing the effect of the demand, of the change in demand identified in part F on the value of the Japanese yen relative to the United States dollar. So let's do F and G. Okay. So if real GDP in the U.S. increases because aggregate demand increases, Japanese imports into the U.S. will increase. If there's more demand in the U.S., that's demand for everything. So there'll be more folks buying Japanese cars and things like that, Japanese whatevers. So that means that Japanese imports are going to increase. And this will increase the demand for Japanese yen in the foreign exchange market. Because remember, if the U.S. imports goods from Japan, they first have to buy Japanese yen or exchange yen for dollars in order to buy anything made in Japan. So what that means is that there's going to be an increase in demand. So once again, this is the one you're going to want to draw. I've got it in green shaded here. And remember, because we're drawing it for Japanese yen, then the quantity of yen is going to be on your horizontal axis. I almost said vertical again. I say it backwards all the time. Horizontal axis. And you're going to put whatever is here is going to be in the denominator up here, okay? And then the other currency is going to be dollars, right? Dollars. Wow. Come on, go in there. Okay, well, there's supposed to be an A right there, right? No matter. Okay, dollars over yen, right? And the demand for, as we said right here, the demand for yen on the market's going to go up because U.S. needs yen to buy Japanese goods. Therefore, the value of the yen relative to the dollar is going to go up, right? So it'll take more dollars to buy yen, which means the numerator, the numerator gets larger, right? Because it's going to take more dollars to buy the same amount of yen because the value of the yen is going up, okay? So that might be the whole thing. Let me make sure that's it. That's everything. Yeah. Yep, there you go. So that's problem 2. Does anybody have any questions on problem 2? Anyone? You're good? Okay. All right. So let me grab my little bouncing ball here and go to problem 3. Oh, I already have one. Good. Okay. So what do we have for problem 3? Okay, so the first question is, how does an increase in Japan's government budget deficit, which means they're spending more than they're bringing in taxes or fees or whatever, so they're spending more than they're bringing in to the government, and so their budget is getting bigger, it's increasing. How will it affect the real interest rate in the short run in Japan, and how will it affect private domestic investment in plant and equipment in Japan if they have, a larger budget deficit? Okay, so real interest rate, which means we're looking at the vulnerable funds market. Okay, so what's going to happen is that if Japan's budget deficit gets larger, the government will have to borrow more money in order to cover their deficit, right? So when they borrow more money to meet its obligations, the demand for loanable funds in Japan will shift right, which means that the real interest rate in Japan is going to go up, okay? Increase. And the higher real interest rate in Japan. Now, once again, we're not talking about foreign investors coming in. We're talking about private domestic investment is going to be more expensive because, once again, firms tend to borrow the money they need for private investment when they're going to, build a house, build a factory, hire more work, whatever they're going to do to expand. They're going to borrow the money. So if interest rates are going to go up, domestic investment in Japan is going to become more expensive and it will go down. So domestic investment in Japan will likely decrease as a result of the government budget deficit growing right here. Okay. So that answers that one. What's the next one? They want you to draw a correctly labeled graph of the foreign exchange market for the euro. So if it's for the euro, remember that means the euro is the quantity in the horizontal axis. And show the effect of the change in the real interest rate in Japan from part 1A1 on the following: supply of euros, and explain that, and the yen price of the euro. Okay, so what do? So we draw a graph showing quantity of euros here, yen to euro. Remember, whatever currency is down here in the quantity is going to be in the denominator up here, and the other currency is in the numerator. And we show a shift in supply for euros. Because why? Because a higher interest rate in Japan will attract foreign investment. Okay, because they're going to come in and want to take advantage of this higher interest rate. So capital will flow into Japan from the world. So European investors will supply more euros on the foreign exchange market in order to invest. And in this case right here, we're talking about something like government bonds, right? If the government of Japan goes in it has a deficit, it will go out to the world and sell bonds in order to finance its deficit at some rate of interest. So if the interest rate's higher, it's going to make their bonds more attractive to the world, which means capital will flow into Japan from the world. And we're talking specifically about the euro. In order for euros to flow into Japan, they first must flow into the foreign exchange market and get exchanged for yen, right? So that means the supply of euros in the foreign exchange market will, sorry about that, my jumping around, I was just getting this guy. So the supply of euros will go up, or shift right, which means the value of the yen will go down relative to the euro. I mean, sorry, I just said it backwards. The value of the euro will drop because it'll take fewer yens to buy a euro. Because if the supply of the euro if the market is flooded with euros, that means that drives down the value of the euro, which means the numerator, it takes fewer yens to buy a euro. So this value of this whole expression drops, right? So the relative value of the euro to the yen drops. Okay. Depreciates. Did I say that backwards? I said, why did I say appreciate? Whoa. Wait a minute. Let me make sure I didn't do something wrong here. Whoa. Come on. Student page. Oh, okay. I'm getting this is answering the next question. So the one I just answered is here. This increased supply of euros will devalue or depreciate the euro relative to the yen. 1 euro will cost fewer Japanese yens. Okay, so that's good. This one right down here answers the last question. Let's see what it is, so we don't get confused. Okay, to reverse the change in the yen price of the euro identified in part B2, should the European Central Bank buy or sell euros in the foreign exchange market, right? So to reverse the devaluing of the euro, what should the European Central Bank do? Well, the answer is to increase the value of the euro on the foreign exchange market, the European Central Bank should buy euros. They should take euros out of the market, right? This will decrease the supply and increase the demand. If they're buying them up, it means the demand's going up, supply is going down on the foreign exchange market, and the euro will appreciate. And this is this is key because the European Union has a lot of power in the world. So they can certainly have the power to keep the relative value of the euro from dropping too low by going on the market, the foreign exchange market, and just simply buying a whole bunch of euros. Okay? And that's problem 3. So I'm going to actually stop share. Hey, Sebastian, how you doing? We got Sebastian,
Good.
Sarah, aka Caroline, Sophie, Katie, Stephanie. We've got a good group here, so I'll make sure I give you guys a credit for being here. Now, does anybody have any questions, concerns, worries? I'm going to assume that everyone's had a chance to at least glance over the final exam study guide and the checklist. Hey, Ella, does anybody think they're going to have a problem with finding that space and time to do the final? If so, please let me know. Okay, I'm going to be sending the information to your site directors this week, so they'll also know how they need to support you in to do the final. Okay. Yeah, Ella.
How much does the final count?
Yeah, turn on your microphone.
Is it on?
I can't hear you.
Okay.
Why can't I hear you?
Okay.
Can I hear anyone? Somebody else say something. Is it me or is it Ella?
Hi.
Somebody else say something.
Hi.
Sophie, are
Yep.
you saying anything?
Yeah.
And my sound's not working. Why is my sound not working? It's frustrating. Something's not working right.
Wait, can other people hear me? Or
Chat with. Do a chat. Ask me through a chat.
It's not that important, but okay.
Type it in. What do you need to know? Do you see it?
Final count.
Click on chat. Type here. Yeah. Right there. Can you hear me, Ella? Can you chat with me? Can you type in what you want to ask me with there's a chat button. If you go down to the bottom, there's like a chat thing. You don't want to? I don't know why I can't hear you. Something's wrong with I don't know. I can't hear anybody. Oh, got it. Okay. How much does the final count towards our final grade? What did I say? Let me look at the syllabus. I'll tell you real quick. Let me see the course documents, syllabus. Final exam counts. 20%. 20% of your final grade. The fall semester grade is 40%. Your spring semester final grade is 40%, and your final exam is 20% of your final grade. But I will say this, let me get back to you guys. If you really look at that study guide, if you look at it for every question, I've said specifically what you need to know to answer it. So if you go over that, and I'm going to have 2 sessions next week and the week after where I will go over the study guide for the final. So if you attend them, and if you can't, watch the video and you spend some time on it, and you've been looking at the quiz questions. The last time we had a session was February. So we've had a whole month, and I'm hoping that you spend some time studying. So if you put time into it, you should do well. I mean, you should be prepared. There will be no surprises. You know what you have to know, right? And you've been answering the questions like you're going to get on the final pretty much all year. So, I want, my goal is for everybody to score a 90 or higher on it, because, and that's why I tried to write the study guide so I would not give you the answer, but you would absolutely know what to study in order to answer it. Does that make sense? So that you're not wasting your time, right? And the final, and I gave you sort of a breakdown of the topics. The AP exam that you take in May, I think it's Wednesday, May 15th, I think, is going to be very, very, very similar to the final. Very, very similar. So if you do well on the final, there's a really good chance you'll do well on the AP. Now, the only other thing is keep in mind that the window to take, I think, let me just hold on just one second here. Let me look at it so make sure I don't say anything wrong. The window that I've set up for you guys to take the final exam is between Monday, April 29 and Friday, May 10, right? So you've got like 10 days. Now, here's the thing. Where'd you guys go? If you wait longer, you'll have more time to study, but you'll have less time in between the final and the AP. If you take the final sooner, you'll see the results of the multiple choice right away, right? I mean, because it's going to be online. And as soon as you submit it, you'll see it, right? So that will give you more time. The sooner you take it in that window, of time, the sooner you would do it, the more time you'll have to look at what you got wrong or, sort of prepare, use the final to help you prepare for the actual AP exam. So it's kind of a trade-off, right? So it's up to you to decide, with your classmates, like a lot of you are in the same school, right? So you'll have to all kind of decide, come up with a consensus on when you want to do the final, because you all need to do it at the same place at the same time, okay? So think about it, right? Think about what will work better for you, okay?
Every single person needs to
And
do it.
the good news is every second you spend studying for the final is going to be like studying for the actual exam in May, because they're going to be very, very, very similar. Okay? Sound good? Yeah? I'm sorry my sound's not working. Everyone has to take the final exam at the same time. Everyone at your school does, right? Everybody at your school does. Because if I don't, then I can't give you the results right away, right? I want you guys to get the results as soon as you submit it, right? Not for the essay, but for the multiple choice, and it's going to be proctored. So it's going to be like the real exam. And the biggest thing is you're not going to be able to go on any other websites, right? Like I know it's tempting when you're doing the quizzes to like Google an answer, right? I'm not sure. Let me just Google. You're right on your, I would probably, So it's hard not to, isn't it? So, but when you're taking the final, you're going to have a teacher saying, no, you have to stay on that blackboard the whole time, right? And the only way I can ensure that, because here's the thing, it's not going to be helpful if you make a really high grade on the final and then don't do well on the actual AP exam. If you do the final like the real thing and you do well on it, then you'll have a lot more confidence going into the one, the national exam, and you should do well on it as well. Okay. And the students, just so you know, the students last year who attended these sessions scored a 5. They scored a 5. The ones who didn't. Right. So you guys who are here, you're going to do well. Just because not necessarily because you're here, but the thing is, the fact that you're here means that you care, right? And you're probably studying. So I have very high expectations that you guys are going to do really well if you put in the time. Okay. So thank you for your time. I'll hopefully see you guys again tomorrow if you can at 8, and we'll go over the quiz 10 study guide. There's a few questions in there that are a bit tricky. I'm going to try to help you understand what they're asking. Okay. Does anybody have any questions before we go? And I also try to get my sound to work. I mean, I don't know why I can't hear you guys. I got to figure out what's going on here. Okay. All right, guys. Everybody good? Okay. See you hopefully tomorrow. Okay. Bye-bye. Good night.
All right.